Hello and welcome back. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by R&D member Ian Duke. And, well, we've heard from Tom Martell. He'll be one of our players in the feature match area. But there's a lot of great talent that's already gone at least 2-0 in their draft thus far. And we're going to get a chance to see who some of our winners of our pods are here at Pro Tour Kaladesh. Let's head down to the feature match area. Hello and welcome to this round 3 of Pro Tour Kaladesh. You can see our players just sitting ready to play. This is the last round of draft for the day. We'll have more draft tomorrow, but each of these players is looking to be in a position to be the winner of their pod. And some big names in the feature match area. There you can see Yuya Watanabe, newly enshrined Hall of Fame player. He's shuffling up against Andre Stradsky, Eric Frolis against Pascal Maynard. We've already seen Tom Martell talking to LSV about his draft, but we're going to be kicking things off with, well, we've got 2 Pro Tour winners on our main match. That there is Craig Wescoe. Craig has been known for playing aggression and playing white decks since sort of pretty much the entire history of the game, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see him being comparatively aggressive here in the Kaladesh format. His opponent, well, we've got another Pro Tour winner. Martin Dang, he has picked up a draw already in this draft, so he's kind of been paired up, but what sort of decks have we got going on here, Ian? What can we expect to see?
So the basic character of this matchup is we have Craig Wescoe playing a red-black, quite aggressive deck. He's certainly going to be the beatdown in this matchup here. On the other side of the table, Martin Dang playing a mostly blue deck with a bit of black, and he's much more of a controlling deck. So he's going to be trying to stall out the early game and, you know, get into the later game where he's leveraging the power of just more impactful cards. Scrappy
Scrounger the play for Craig Wescoe, signaling some aggression, joined by Chief of the Foundry, and that means a big attack that the Ether Theorist from Martin Dang is not going to be liable to block. 4 points coming through for Craig Wescoe early, and we're already beginning to get a feel for what he's got going on.
Ether Theorist for Martin Dang early on. One of the best blue commons in the set. Helps you smooth your early draws and is a decent blocker as well as providing some energy you can use on other things.
Now, Picard's Pillarbug would normally be a pretty solid blocker here against what Craig Wescoe has going on. Chief of the Foundry makes that a little bit trickier, though I'm sure that he'll appreciate the life gain if he gets enough time. Some of these artifact creatures effectively colored. We see one on each side of the board here. And a big vehicle here coming down for Craig Wescoe. Oval Chase Dragster just able to get stuck in here.
That was actually a Fleet Wheel Cruiser there.
Sorry about
that. This is the rare version of Oval Chase Dragster, if you will. Comes down as a 5/3, automatically crews itself for a turn, and gets to bash in for 5 trample damage. So Martin Dang very much on the defensive here, staring down a powerful board from Craig Wescoe. Can he come up with what he needs?
Well, Vidalcan Blade Master, the 2/3 with prowess there. It's going to have to be in blocking mode, as are all of the creatures from Martin Dang on just 6 life. He's yet to see a coloured spell from Craig Wescoe, but in red-black, he knows that there's potential for removal. He knows that there's lots of artifact matters. This looks like a very solid deck from Wescoe. We can see in his hand there an Eager Construct, a Reckless Fireweaver, that represents a little bit of burn. But Rush of Vitality, a nice trick here, especially when you've got a bit of trample going on there from the vehicle. Everyone gets a scry off that Eager Construct. There we see it, ready to play with its ball. And immediately the Construct jumps in the car. It's going to be hitting the red zone. I can't see a good reason for Craig Wescoe not to be attacking pretty heavily here. Big swings coming in here from Craig Wescoe, and Martin Dang, he's going to have a tough time figuring out blocks here. Already 5 points of trample coming across, so some damage will be getting through. Sorry, 6 points of trample thanks to that Chief of the Foundry. And Craig Wescoe's sequenced this very nicely, still has mana up in order to play his combat trick.
This is a 6/4.
So here comes the big play. Rush of Vitality now meaning that that double block from Martin Dang not looking quite so exciting. Dang goes to 1. Craig Wescoe gaining a bit of life thanks to the lifelink granted by Rush of Vitality. And at this point, Martin Dang, I would guess, might just not want to show any more cards.
Yeah, I think the writing's on the wall here as far as this game is concerned. And yeah, indeed, Martin Dang packs it up there in the face of that hugely aggressive draw from Craig Wescoe there with his red-black-based artifact aggro deck.
See a smile there from Wescoe. The good news about having games this fast, it means we're going to get plenty more Magic in. But before we do, these messages.
Check out Kaladesh Draft Leagues on Magic Online. Build a deck at your own pace and play at your convenience. Draft anytime, play anytime. For more information, visit mtgo.com.
Optimism, innovation, and the spirit of creativity fill these pages, lavishly illustrated with the award-winning art of Magic the Gathering. Welcome to Kaladesh, a vibrant, beautiful plane where anything is possible. Join the heroic planeswalkers of the Gatewatch as they explore the Inventor's Fair, and let your imagination soar alongside thopters and airships, crafted by the best artificers in the multiverse.
Hello and welcome back to this round 3 here at Pro Tour Kaladesh. We're going to get a chance for a look in one of our other matches here. We already saw Andre Stratsky in the feature match area last round against Brian Kibler. This round he's got another Hall of Famer, though admittedly a Hall of Famer who has only been a member of the Hall for a matter of hours. Last night, Yuya Watanabe was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and now he finds himself 2-0 and in a pretty reasonable spot up against Stratsky here already with, well, 3 different colors of mana going on and some fairly nice creatures also. Now, Stratsky's deck was characterized by its aggression last round. We can see Thriving Grubs there alongside the Kujar Seedsmith, and Welding Sparks here is going to mean that, well, we saw it last game, we're seeing it again here. Just so powerful being able to play combat tricks in order to give indestructibility to your creatures, because they're affording Yuya Watanabe just a fantastic block with lifelink, still indestructible, and yeah, he's now in much better shape. So there we can see the life totals. Watanabe's taken a little bit of a hit in the early game, and that's kind of what Stratsky's deck does best. But right now, with just Kujar Seedsmith in play, a little bit of energy, he's kind of on the wrong sides of things, and Yuya Watanabe is not going to take all that long to be able to get back in things here with his Aetherborn Marauder coming through in the air. 3/3 lifelinker now. Normally it gets to steal +1/+1 counters. This time round, well, it's managed to do it in a little bit more straightforward fashion. Getting a little glance of what's going on in Andre Stratsky's hand. It looks like he's got a few more lands in there. Not ideal for him.
Yeah, and if that's the case, Tim, it looks like things are shaping up pretty well for Yuya here. He's got that lifelink flyer coming in the air, giving him a nice life total advantage. And, you know, just based on what we saw from Andre's deck in the previous round, it looks like he's fairly aggressive and would need to close out a game, you know, pretty early on in order to have his best chances. So I like Yuya's spot quite a bit here.
Yeah, looking at Yuya's hand, not only does he have that Hall of Fame ring on his finger, in the hand itself he has an Aetherstorm Rock. If you can find the second white mana to be able to cast it, it's a very powerful addition to just about any board. The Aetherborn Marauder getting stuck in here. Looks like table A is just about ready to get started. I think it might be worth jumping back here. I think Yuya's going to be looking to sort of gradually work his way across with that Marauder, but it may take a bit of time. And, well, we know based on what we've seen already of Martin Dang and Craig Wescoe that we could be in for another very quick game down there. Now, let's take a little bit of a look at the deck lists of Dang and Wescoe. Wescoe has 2 copies of Unlicensed Disintegration. That one of the big signpost cards, we call them, and that one feels kind of pushed in terms of development to really show what Red-Black's trying to do.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and that card in particular doubles as a card that we might see showing up in Constructed as well this weekend.
Yeah, Emerald Bruiser coming down for Martin Dang. That one, it is going to really want there to be artifacts in play for Martin Dang. Comes into play tapped. It's a 3/1, which certainly rumbles very nicely with a lot of what Wescoe has going on, but it cannot block. and it can potentially gain Menace. Sorry, it can block, but it gains Menace when you have an artifact. There we go. Both players scrying off that Eager Construct. Got a couple of updates from some of our matches on the back tables. Paulo Vitor Damarosa a game up in his match against Tom Martel. The aggression winning out there thus far. And Eric Froelich, well, he's 2 matches up and 1 game up here in his final round of this draft. Ether Theorist from Martin Dang coming down. And once again, Wescoe is hitting his curve, again getting that Chief of the Foundry on turn 3. A 3-3 Eager Construct, much, much scarier in the red zone, means that Ether Theorist again just relegated to scrying duty rather than blocking. Martin Dang's blue-black deck already has a draw, so even though we're calling this the final of the draft, because if Craig Wescoe wins, it's a nice clean 3-0 for him, Martin Dang, the best that he can get to here is 2 and a draw. I'm guessing that this blue-black deck sometimes just can sort of get stuck in a bit of a board stall.
Yeah, that certainly can happen in this format, Tim, especially when there are, for example, 2 more controlling blue decks up against one another. There can be lots of tokens coming up the battlefield that can be difficult to punch through.
Now, Bomat Bazaar Barge, a great pickup for Martin Dang here. Firstly, it draws him a card when it comes into play, but also Crew 3, that's something that he can definitely achieve, gets him a 5-5. And 5-5 right now, it looks very favourable against the creatures that Craig Wescoe has going on. That Rush of Vitality, though, again in Wescoe's hand, alongside a Subtle Strike, he has the tricks to potentially set something up here. It's just going to be a matter of how he chooses to deploy them. Yeah,
an interesting decision for Martin Dang on his previous turn. He could have left that Embrel Bruiser untapped in order to crew the Bomat Bazaar Barge. Opted not to do it to get in for some extra damage instead. Could indicate that Martin is taking a more aggressive stance in this game, or just that he doesn't want to get blown out by a removal spell after he's crewed his vehicle. But speaking of blowouts, here comes a Subtle Strike.
Now, this Subtle Strike doing it all here. +1/+1 to his creature, -1/-1 to another creature. Chooses not to give -1/-1 to the Ether Theorist. That's going to die anyway just because of the Chief of the Foundry getting pumped. Instead, Embrel Bruiser going down, and this meaning that the best that Martin Dang can do is get one last parting scry from that Ether Theorist before it also hits the graveyard. And now that Bomat Bazaar Barge stranded without any creatures to crew it.
And a Reckless Fireweaver coming down here for Craig Wescoe.
I think that's the first coloured creature that we've seen from Wescoe, and that suggests to me that the Fireweaver will be particularly good. Bastion Mastodon coming down for Dang, but he can't really afford to be crewing up his Bazaar Barge, just has to sit back there with the big 4/5 Elephant. As much as we've talked about some of the artifacts kind of having a colour identity, Bastion Mastodon is just a very solid set of statistics for its 5 cost there, so it's one that we do see splash just a little bit more.
Definitely true. Now, yeah, there is a cycle of common artifact creatures, each with an activated ability for a colored mana to gain a keyword. And you're right, Tim, Bastion Mastodon is the one that kind of stands on its own the best, even if you don't have access to white mana. Now, this game's shaping up pretty interestingly here in that, Craig Wescoe did have a fairly aggressive start, but Martin Dang still at a fairly healthy 14 life and with a number of powerful cards in his hand.
The Unlicensed Disintegration here gives an interesting set of options for Craig Wescoe. He could try and kill off the Mastodon, but I guess if he does, then the Bazaar Barge is just going to get crewed, or he can attack in and just see whether or not the barge does get crewed and then do things in response. Looks like the latter is what he's going with here. And looking at the cards in Martin Dang's hand, Craig Wescoe really is going to want to get the damage in early because there are 2 very powerful creatures available to Dang if he can get the time.
So really interestingly here, Martin Dang opts to crew the Bazaar Barge before blockers. That opens the door for Unlicensed Disintegration to hit the Bazaar Barge. And this is going to be a tremendous amount of damage coming through on Martin Dang here. That, while it was certainly a reasonable decision, worked out very, very poorly for Martin Dang there.
Yeah.
As you said, Tim, if he had just tried to go to blockers and blocked with the Mastodon, he would not have opened himself to that vulnerability.
Yeah, 3 points of damage from the Unlicensed Disintegration. All of that unblocked damage. Martin Dang on just 4 life here. Casts his Marionette Master, and looks like he's pretty much going to have to go for lots of servos. Now, when those servos die, or indeed when any artifact goes to Martin Dang's graveyard from now on, Marionette Master will deal damage equal to its power to Craig Wescoe, but will cause life loss equal to the power to Craig Wescoe. With just 1 point of power, that's not all that scary.
Martin Dang now at a precarious 4 life with Reckless Fireweaver on the other side of the battlefield for Craig Wescoe. It sort of puts a clock on the game for Martin Dang, and that he's going to have to win before Craig Wescoe either top decks into 4 more artifacts or just somehow sneaks a couple points of damage through in combination with a couple triggers from the Reckless Fireweaver.
An update from our back table, that match with Yu Yu Watanabe. Yu Yu was able to take down the first game with the Aetherborn Marauder swinging in the air, gaining him life.
Wescoe top decking a land and just forced to pass back the turn. Opens up the door here for Martin Dang to resolve an
Aether Squall Ancient.
Aether Squall Ancient, that's right.
So currently
Huge.
2 energy. He's going to be gaining 3 energy each upkeep, and once he gets up to a full 8 energy, he can pay all of it to bounce all other creatures to their owner's hands. And you can do it as a sorcery, but you know what? Whenever you're going to do it, it's pretty powerful. The interesting thing for Dang here is that because of Reckless Fireweaver, bouncing everything might actually be kind of scary. It may just give Craig Wescoe a way of dealing damage that does not involve attacking.
That's right, Tim. I think the more important aspect of that Ancient right now is that it's just a 6/6 flyer and provides a way for Martin Dang to potentially win the game before Craig Wescoe can finish things off. But now with a Sky Skiff for Craig Wescoe, that's going to mean the Aether Squall Ancient has to kind of sit back and play defense for the time being.
Prophetic Prison giving kind of a rebuy for Martin Dang on his draws, gets to draw an additional card when it comes into play. And Malfunction, kind of an interesting pickup here. The difficult thing that Martin Dang faces at this point, though, is that he's on just 3 life, and he could just die to Reckless Fireweaver damage. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that Wescoe can simply play out a few more artifacts here. Now, Prophetic Prism does give the white mana needed to give that Bastion Mastodon Vigilance, and that does open the door for some attacks for Martin Dang. He's recognized that he can't just wait on his heels, has to get stuck in here. Presumably, the cards in hand for Martin Dang means that he doesn't feel too threatened by that Sky Skiff just yet.
Yeah, so some interesting options for both players here. Craig Wescoe does have a Rush of Vitality in his hand, which he can use to either set up a nice double block here potentially and gain some life. On the other hand, taking a look at what Martin Dang has, in addition to that copy of Malfunction that you mentioned, Tim, he also has an Ether Trade Winds, which means he can interact at instant speed, bouncing a permanent for each player back to their owner's hands. And that's going to give him the flexibility to make this attack with confidence. Even if Craig Wescoe, double blocks or triple blocks or has a combat trick there, the Ether Trade Winds can potentially disrupt that. So this could be really interesting to see how Craig decides to block and whether he elects to use that Rush of Vitality.
Well, it looks like we do have a double block here, and Wescoe conveniently put the creatures in front in more or less the same order that Martin Dang would have chosen anyway. And 1 point of damage coming from that Marionette Master, because that was an artifact going to the graveyard for Martin Dang. Just 7 life left for Wescoe here. That's a much more precarious position than he was in mere moments ago.
And now Martin Dang deciding whether he wants to use that Malfunction on the Sky Skiff or just leave up Ether Trade Winds. Both are reasonable options here. Sort of the baseline play is to play Malfunction on the Sky Skiff, and that gives Martin Dang the opportunity to attack with the Aether Squall Ancient and some servos next turn, which makes it so Craig either has to block the servos or not block the servos. If he doesn't block them, it'll be a lethal attack. If he does block the servos, then they'll die, and the Marionette Master will trigger, making it lethal as well.
Yeah, Martin Dang has maneuvered his way around very well here in this in order to do the best that he can. He obviously still just needs to worry about more artifacts coming from Wescoe, but I think he can reasonably assume that if they're coming off the top at this point. So Sky Skiff comes in here, and this is going to prompt something from Martin Dang. He has to be a little worried here.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Martin, of course, is not going to block. He can simply take the 2 and try to bait Craig Wescoe into going for the Rush of Vitality, or he can just go ahead and play it safe with that Ether trade wins. The unfortunate aspect of just playing out the trade wins here is it still leaves Craig Wescoe with that Rush of Vitality in his hand, and it also allows Craig to replay the Sky Skiff post-combat, which will allow the Sky Skiff to potentially block the Ether Squall Ancient. So, bit of an interesting decision tree there for Martin.
I mean, kind of an interesting decision simply what to bounce with Ether Trade Winds. I mean, there's temptations to bounce a Prophetic Prism to draw a card, potentially even to bounce a Marionette Master so that you can get a second set of triggers from it coming into play. Eventually chooses to bounce one of his own servos there.
So now here on Martin's turn, he can take that line I was describing last turn where he plays Malfunction on the Sky Skiff here and attacks with the Ether Squall Ancient and some servos, which would again put Craig in a position where he either needs to take the damage from the servo or block and kill a servo. Either way, it presents lethal because of the Marionette Master. Now, what Martin Dang doesn't know is there's that Rush of Vitality in Craig Wescoe's hand. So if he goes for that play, he may not actually end up getting the lethal that he expects here because of the lifelink from Rush of Vitality. So we'll see how this plays out.
I mean, another option that Martin Dang is perilously close to being able to employ is simply bouncing everything with Ether Squall Ancient. Unfortunately, with 7 life rather than 6, that gets a little bit messier. All right, so on the face of things, this does appear to be a lethal attack.
And this is huge here, Tim. So this block plus Rush of Vitality is going to gain Craig Wescoe 3 life, which will put him up to 10. He'll take 8 from the unblocked servo and Ether Squall Ancient. And then another loss of 1 life from the Marionette Master. But is that going to be enough?
Every single piece of the Buffalo needed here to make it work. The indestructible important, potentially. The lifelink, certainly huge. And the +1 power, just enough to mean that Craig Wescoe is able to survive this attack.
And now here's the problem for Martin. He could use the Ether Squall Ancient to return all creatures to their owner's hand. But then the problem is that sends 2 artifacts back, as well as the Reckless Fireweaver, to Craig Wescoe's hand. And he could simply just replay them all, and Martin would be dead. So I believe that.
Well, a land pickup there for Craig Wescoe. It's certainly not ideal. He still doesn't have an answer to that Ether Squall Ancient.
That could have potentially opened the door now if Craig had picked up an artifact this turn to just attack with both and play an artifact. But
Wescoe still has to represent it. The sweat very much on here for Martin Dang. On 1 life.
Craig tapping 2 lands there, feigning that he would play an artifact there, but instead just reveals that he has only lands in hand and concedes. But that game, a real nail-biter there, Tim. Really came down to those last couple attacks and just a point or 2 of life for either player there. Certainly could have gone either direction. Really exciting to watch.
Yeah, I liked how that game went a lot. I think it showed that there is the option for these slower decks to find a way of dealing with what the more aggressive decks are trying to put out there. Very interested to see how Marionette Master worked out. So we're going to get a chance to look in on Andres Stradsky versus Yuya Watanabe here. Remember, Watanabe already a game up, largely off the back of an Aetherborn Marauder, able to get stuck in. This time around, it's a different kind of Aetherborn joining the battlefield. That one, an ambitious one, joined by a Morphis squad. There's a Lawbroker in play there, Glint Sleeve Artisan for him. On the other side of things, well, Aradara Express is potentially ready to get crewed up, and with Menace, it can attack in for quite a bit. 1 point of energy there, meaning that Spontaneous Artist can also give creatures haste. So there could be quite a lot of damage coming from Stradsky here if he wants to on this turn. Pima Outrider the choice, and it looks like it's going to be bringing a servo along with it. Stradsky just puts the 1/1 in play, and that, of course, meaning that We get a little bit of extra action there. Just a little bit of a loot. And now comes the attacks. Or indeed, the pass back to Yu Watanabe. I guess at this point, the board getting kind of busy. And which of these decks would you say that kind of favors?
Certainly favors Yuya's deck, I think. Andre's deck is, it's not all-in aggressive in the way that we've seen some of the other decks here today. Just be trying to blitz and win an early game. But, Andre's deck definitely does rely on curving out and kind of getting in early damage with fairly big statted creatures as far as the early game is concerned. But once the board stalls out, his deck full of 3/3-ish size creatures isn't going to be as effective against Yuya's ample blockers here.
Yeah, maybe he has to lean on that Quicksmith Gearsmith just a little bit more in terms of Quicksmith Genius, sorry, in terms of just finding him the cards that he needs. There's a little vehicle section on Andre Strasky's side of the board. Gets a loot in there and actually finds a relevant one in terms of welding sparks. He's got 3 artifacts in play, so that's basically a murder for his deck. He's going to be able to kill something very, very relevant, assuming that he can keep those artifacts in play. Does have to pass back with no attacks, though. So Watanabe has his own form of card advantage. Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot there, letting him draw a card. And the card that he draws, just a huge one. That looks to be the Aetherstorm Rock. And Aetherstorm Rock, for those of you not familiar with it, really does have a big impact on just about any board state. Every creature that comes into play for you gives you an energy. And whenever you want to attack with it, you can start spending energy to tap down creatures, put +1/+1 counters on your bird, and games end pretty quickly at that point. For now, of course, Andre Strasky can just carry on with his play because Yuya did tap a white mana in order to be able to cast that Puzzle Knot. Thriving Grub's the play from Andre Strasky. Gets a little bit more energy, but his deck is not necessarily one that is a big energy deck. It simply has some ways of generating and indeed using it. Spontaneous Artist being one of the ones that could prove relevant here. Now, we see that the players are drawing opening hands for the main game. We're going to stick with this one for just a moment or two. The round's going fairly fast. I think we'll have time to get a bit of extra magic in. And that means that we get to figure out whether or not Yuya Watanabe is going to close things out with Aetherstorm Rock, or if Andre Strasky, well, he can send that trainer running and derail Yuya's plans of going 3-0 in this draft.
All right. Here's what I've been waiting for. That Aradara Express is getting crewed up. And this is pretty cool. This is actually something that Andre sideboarded in for this matchup. Now, it may seem strange to talk about, just a big vehicle being a sideboard card, but really the role that it's playing here is Andre knows that Yuya's deck is kind of a grindier, more mid-range, base black-white deck. And just having a huge vehicle in there that might require multiple creatures to trade for it or to block it is a huge advantage. It's almost a form of card advantage in that sense. So I really like that choice by Andre to bring in that huge Aradara Express vehicle.
Yeah, 8 Power of Menace is enough that he's certainly threatening to at least kill a couple of creatures here, should he be able to be blocked. And, of course, we know that there's Welding Sparks in hand for Strasky here, so a simple double block may well have not gone well enough. Looks like Watanabe smelled that out, though. Puts 3 creatures in front of the Express, and that means that he's got a little bit of added insurance here. Now, on the face of things, I think it does look like a Welding Sparks is going to work out pretty well for Strasky here, all told.
Yeah. From Strasky's point of view, he can take out the ambitious Aetherborn, and that'll leave just a 2/3 Percata Pillar Bug and the 3/2 Lawless Broker blocking. Opts to save the Welding Sparks and instead just trade for the clean 3-for-1 there. And again, just leveraging that huge vehicle as a source of card advantage.
Now, Girapur Guide coming down does actually change things a fair amount. Its ability, you can pay 2 colorless and a green to give target creature unblockability by small creatures. Anything with a power 2 or less will not be able to block something that has been Girapur Guided.
And that was a pretty cool attack by Andre Strasky, getting in with that vehicle and trading first before revealing that he had that guide there. And without the information about that potentially coming down, Yuya actually traded off 2 of the creatures that still would be able to block.
And of course, Welding Spark's still available to in the future, just make it so that even if there are blocks coming on a bigger creature that's been guided, they may still not work out particularly well. So there is a path here for Andre Strasky. Watanabe playing at KG with a Caterpillar Bug here. Now, Strasky only has 5 lands in play, and that's a slightly unfortunate number for him. It means that he only really gets to do one thing this turn. If he's activating his Girapur Guide, then he's not casting Welding Sparks. If he's casting Welding Sparks, well, he's not going to be able to be doing too much else. So some tricky decisions for him here in terms of lining up how he wants to proceed.
So it looks like Andre here kind of lining things up, considering his potential attacks, considering what Yuya would block with each different combination of attackers.
Looking at his hand, it looks like he's got a copy of Takedown. Now, I don't know whether or not that is something that is impacted on whether or not Yuya Watanabe wants to play out his Aetherstorm Rock anytime soon. It may well be that he's played it in a previous game and that Andre has a bit of inside information to worry about that one. We, of course, picking things up kind of partway through. We're just hearing that he did manage to play it in Game 1, so not a card that you'd naturally expect to see too much in main decks, but take down a very important sideboard card in matchups like this where you know that there's a very powerful flyer that you need to deal with.
Yeah, we did also see Aetherborn Marauder in Game 1 being pretty dominant there, enabling Yuya to race, so it certainly makes sense to me that Andre has brought in that takedown.
Relatively modest set of attacks here, just the cruiser coming across. Fleetwheel Cruiser, of course, naturally a 5/3 trampler when it comes into play. Relatively cheap to crew as well, just the 2 power needed to crew it.
And Yuya must be assuming that something is up here because, yeah, the obvious block there is just to block with the Lawless Broker, 3/2 against a 5/3, allows for a trade and allows Yuya to put a +1/+1 counter of one of his creatures. But no in-combat tricks from Andre, just lets it happen.
And the Pillar Bug, kind of a natural target to put a counter on. The extra point of power, very, very relevant when you've got the potential for lifelink. And here comes that Welding Sparks before the counter goes on. Strasky's done a great job here of whittling down the board that Yuya Watanabe's been able to put together here. He's not had a huge amount of lands to play with, but has got a big force into play and just gradually been able to make each combat difficult for the new Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and on that topic, Tim, one of the things you often see happen in these clogged sort of mid-game board states in Kaladesh Limited is that you'll often want to trade off your vehicles for your opponent's quote-unquote real creatures. And the reason for that is, crewing a vehicle turn after turn requires committing multiple cards into that one vehicle in that sense that you have to tap one or more other creatures. And so at a certain point in the game, you just want to trade your vehicles off, even if it's just 1-for-1 with your opponent's creatures, just to clean up the board and ensure that you're not having to invest multiple resources into each attacker. So I actually like that sequence by Andre quite a bit.
Well, it's taken a relatively unusual collection of plays in order for Yu Watanabe to keep around his Picata Pillar Bug. 2 copies of Subtle Strike were enough to put enough counters on it to survive the Welding Sparks. And now that it's also got that +1/+1 counter from the Lawbroker, it represents a gigantic threat. Likewise, Aetherstorm Rock, a gigantic threat. That one can get taken down by takedown, pun very much intended. Unfortunately, though, the Picata Pillar Bug now, a big 5/6 that can gain lifelink, and lifelink not the friend of your aggressive red-green deck.
So quite a furious back and forth there. Before those subtle strikes, I would have said things were looking really good for Andre Strosky. After the subtle strikes and adding the Aetherstorm Rock to Yuya's side of the table, I would have said, well, things look really great for Yuya here. But then the takedown indeed takes down that Aetherstorm Rock, and things settling back in here again to quite a board stall. And Andre not with any really great attacks here because of that Picata Pillar Bug representing a 5/6 lifelinker.
Yeah, we now see ourselves in a board stall situation. Each of these players beginning to run out of cards in hand. As much as that last turn was great for Yuya, being able to deal with the Welding Sparks, he's running out of cards. I think it might be time to head back to the front and see a little bit of our main match. Of course, we will give you plenty more updates. Bearing in mind, that's just game 2 that's going on for Andre and Yuya. There's a very real chance that we'll get a chance to see even more magic from them after we get this, our deciding game from Craig Wescoe and Martin Dang over on our front table. We, of course, haven't missed any magic. That one was being held there, so we got a chance to see things from the very get-go. Both players leading off with a Swamp and a Whirler-Maker in hand for Craig Wescoe here. Kind of an interesting one. Great if it works out that he ends up being a little flooded, though it's worth noting that his deck only playing 16 land.
And there's that Emerald Bruiser again for Martin Dang. Bit of an odd card in his deck, given that most of his deck is fairly defensive, and the Bruiser is a pretty aggressive creature, but still works well, gets in some early damage, trades, maybe cruise a vehicle.
And there we see Spireside Infiltrator, one of the perfect cards to crew a vehicle, comes in, immediately gets tapped to jump in that Sky Skiff, doing a point of damage to Dang on the way.
Yeah, an honorary pilot is the Spireside Infiltrator.
It looks like Dang on the aggressive as well here. Vidalcan Blademaster coming down. That a 2/3 with prowess. Not a lot of prowess in the set, but this particular Vidalcan is able to get +1/+1 whenever you play non-creature spells. And vehicles, of course, do count toward that. Achieving prowess not as difficult as it might be in some other sets without kind of setting back your creature count too much.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You have things like Puzzle Knots and Prophetic Prism as well to help you trigger prowess.
So Wescoe here, a few options available. Essence Extraction, not something he can cast just yet. It's interesting that he's not really got a really mana-efficient choice here. He's either going to play a 2-drop with 3 mana, or the 1 3-drop that he can cast isn't going to do anything until he has more mana to activate it. So a bit of a tough one for Craig Wescoe.
And that is the Whirler Maker you're referring to there, Tim, which actually is a sideboard card that Craig has brought in for this matchup, and that's a really interesting kind of innovation on his part, recognizing that if Martin's deck is starting to win, the game's probably going longer, and this is a card that could give him a pretty potent late game in that type of situation.
Yeah, the Whirler Maker is a card that I've found to be very interesting in my understanding of this format, because long games where you have lots of mana and nothing to do with it are the ones where I kind of feel the worst in this format, and this is exactly the kind of card that means that I feel kind of great, because if games go long and I've got a Whirler Maker in play, then every single turn I'm doing something relevant.
That's right. And we have seen that Craig Wescoe's deck has a lot of synergy with artifacts as well. Cards like Reckless Fireweaver and other ways to abuse his artifacts.
Yeah, I mean, red-black always wants to have artifacts in play, so that's kind of where he wants to be. We see an attack there from Wescoe, leading to a trade with the Vidalcan Blademaster. Just hearing that, yes, Yu Watanabe was able to pull things out in that game. So he advances to 3-0, a fantastic start for our newly enshrined Hall of Famer. And, well, we have more Vidalcan coming from Martin Dang. This time he's getting things going with a different breed of Vidalcan in terms of what's trying to go on. He's not getting aggressive with Vidalcan Blademaster. Instead, he's trying to do some slightly more sort of controlling elements. He gets to tap, untap creatures with that Janjeet Sentry. There we can see it brings a little bit of energy. Does cost quite a lot of energy to use in terms of tapping or untapping creatures. But the untap for ambushes or indeed tapping down creatures, still a powerful thing to be doing in this format, especially with the likes of vehicles involved. Looks like Craig Wescoe just stepping away from the table to double check something with one of the judges. Wants to make sure that every play is as crisp and clean as possible. And cruise up Skyskiff once more for an attack here, one must presume. This is nice. We're seeing a subtle strike before combat here, dealing with one of the creatures on Martin Dang's side of the board prior to an attack for 3. It's one of those things that putting +1/+1 counters on vehicles, yes, you're kind of committing then to crewing a little bit more in order to get the value out of that counter, but equally, it's going to be the hardest creature to remove on the battlefield for Craig Wescoe. An attack there from the sentry for Martin Dang. And Underhanded Designs. Now, this is a card that really requires plenty of artifacts to get much going. Whenever you cast an artifact, or an artifact comes into play for you, you get to pay 1 to drain your opponent for a point of life. If you've got enough artifacts in play, you can pay 1 and a black and sacrifice it to destroy target creature. Now, I kind of like this card. I found it to be effective in both of its modes.
Yeah, it's a card I like, especially in a blue-black deck that wants to play a bit of a longer game. Blue and black, of course, also being colors that care a lot about artifacts, and given Underhanded Designs is a little bit more mana intensive and you need some more turns to pass by in order to get full value out of it, it's really at its best in a slower blue-black controlling deck with artifact synergy.
Reckless Fireweaver there coming down for Craig Wescoe. Immediately cruise the Skyskiff, and at some point in the future may well pair up very, very nicely with that Whirlermaker still in hand for Wescoe. He's still not found the second black mana, so Essence Extraction in hand, not doing a whole lot, but at least at the moment it doesn't appear that Martin Dang is putting too much pressure on his life total. Enough mana up for Rush of Vitality here. It's the sort of thing that I'm sometimes a little loath to kill off a Filigree Familiar, because this will net a card for Martin Dang as and when it dies, but much, much better than having a trade there. And of course, keeping down the number of artifacts that Martin Dang has in play means that Underhanded Designs becomes less versatile, less powerful.
Yeah, I think Craig correctly realizing that he doesn't have the second black mana for Essence Extraction. Even if he does draw it, it means that he drew a land instead of a non-land card. And beyond that, all he has access to is the Whirlermaker, which is going to take several turns before it really starts to represent a board presence. So again, Craig realizing that the window is kind of closing where he needs to get in as much damage as he can before Martin Dang starts to do more powerful things and really take control of the board. So even though that wasn't the best Rush of Vitality I've seen, definitely do think it was the correct play for him there.
Now, looking at Dang's hand, he's got Precasa Club Security. Elects to start things off with Malfunction, though. More concerned with dealing with the vehicles on the board than having a blocker for what's going on the ground, even if those vehicles are going to effectively cost Craig Wescoe multiple cards in order to get damage in.
And do note that even though Martin Dang has 2 mana open, which is the activation cost for Underhanded Designs does require that you control 2 artifacts in order to activate its ability to destroy a creature.
All
so
right.
Not available just yet for Martin Dang.
Well, we've hit Whirlermaker time, and that means that for our life total trackers, they're going to have plenty of work to do, because it coming into play with Reckless Fireweaver, that's a point of damage. Every additional Thopter coming into play, that's a point of damage. And actually it represents a quicker clock than it might seem on most board states, simply because the flyers are going to be relevant and those points of damage very much relevant also.
Yeah, it'll be quite interesting to see if this Whirlermaker really does have the effect that Craig intended when he decided to sideboard it in. It can be such a slow card in some situations, but it looks like, given the way this game is playing out, it could prove to be really instrumental in working toward a win for Craig Wescoe.
Yeah, Wescoe drew an Ether Torch Renegade there, a perfectly fine creature for controlling a board, but actually that just not as potent as sitting back on mana to make Thopter tokens here. Bomat Bazaar Barge the play for Martin Dang. He immediately both uses his underhand designs to drain a point of life and draws a card from the Bazaar Barge itself. And Dang really is going to have to lean on the life gain side of underhand designs if he's going to keep pace with what's going on Craig Wescoe's side of the board now that Whirlmaker is an option. Prakata Club Security coming in here, and there is the option simply for Craig Wescoe to create a Thopter to simply throw under the bus.
One card, or is it 2 cards?
Yeah, I mean, the main option Craig has here is to make a Thopter and then, I guess, triple block, rather, the Prakata Club Security.
3/4 for 4 mana, kind of an aggressively costed common. Normally we sort of talk about Hill Giants, them being a 3/3 for 3. This just one step better on a vanilla creature.
No blocks.
Yeah, not something that I think we've seen in black before, but R&D has been making a move over time to give black a little bit more toughness, whereas, you know, the red creatures get a little bit more power, so kind of distancing those a little bit, making the colors feel a little bit more different.
And there does come the Thopter. It looks like it's going to be on attacking duty rather than blocking, and the pickup looks like to be a subtle strike there from Craig Wescoe. It may well be that he still simply wants to be on the Whirlmaker plan for now, though. Nice to have the option of being able to do everything at the end of his opponent's turn. Thopter incoming, manages to keep Martin Dang's life total going south rather than north. And Dakara P-Foul means that at least Dang is able to establish some sort of stability in terms of gaining life off underhanded designs. Also, though, a 2/4 that can gain flying is going to be very relevant in terms of holding off what sort of attacks Craig Wescoe can get going in the air.
That's right, an excellent pickup there for Martin Dang. As you said, a flying blocker, also his second artifact, which allows underhanded designs to be turned on, and at any moment for 2 mana, can sacrifice to destroy a creature. So it gives Martin Dang a lot of flexibility here in terms of sculpting combat, and we may even see that Bomat Bazaar Barge get into the red zone here this turn.
Looks like that's the case. In terms of creatures that can attack, it is just a touch larger than the Prakata Club Security. 5/5, a little bit tougher for Craig Wescoe to deal with, even if he has some sort of a trick in there.
And now is when we might see a Thopter being created by Whirlmaker and getting in front of that Bomat Bazaar Barge. But this is not really a sustainable plan for Craig Wescoe if he chooses to do this, because
Yeah, I mean,
it
he's
ties
using
up all of his mana every single turn.
now Dang with 2 copies of Ether Trade Winds in hand, in addition to having the active underhanded designs here. A lot of options available to him considering the number of cards that he's got going on. Meanwhile, Craig Wescoe, surprisingly few options in spite of having lots of cards in hand. He's still not found the double black mana for Essence Extraction. He's just hit 5 mana for Ambitious Aetherborn. In some respects, the most important card that he's got going on is Whirlmaker, and unfortunately for him, that basically constraining anything else that he might be able to do.
Let's go.
So Ambitious Aetherborn getting cast finally hitting that 5th mana. And temptations on both sides here. Do you put a +1/+1 counter on so that you can reasonably block Bomat Bazaar Barge? Do you make a servo so that you can deal a little bit of damage to your opponent thanks to your Reckless Fireweaver?
Resolves. You have 2 cards.
So Martin Dang sacrificing underhanded designs, taking out the Reckless Fireweaver with the Fabricate trigger on the stack. You don't actually decide which way to go with Fabricate until the trigger resolves. So Martin having to make that decision before Craig says what he was planning to do anyway. But as we can see, was planning to make a servo. Still did.
I must say, I do like the fact that Fabricate works the way it does in terms of when the choice happens. It means that you can never get caught out. Your creature gets killed in response to the Fabricate trigger, and you get nothing at all. You're always going to get at least a servo.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. That's something we thought about a lot in R&D in terms of the timing and how exactly that triggered ability works.
So here's High Tide Hermit. It's a 4/4 defender that gives you 4 energy, but just 2 energy is all it takes to put that crab on the offensive. In the meantime, of course, it's perfectly happy to crew vehicles, and in this case, jumps in a Bazaar Barge, and we have a relatively bizarre set of attacks here with Beaumat Bazaar Barge alongside that Pro Club security, getting stuck in and giving Craig Wescoe the option of clearing out this board just a little bit. I must say that Martin Dang has done a good job here of showing how control decks can blunt the initial offense of some of these more aggressive builds and win things out in the longer game.
Yeah, things certainly looking good for Martin in this situation, but bear in mind that Craig Wescoe's still been stuck on that 1 black mana. If he does find a second swamp, the Essence Extraction in his hand could help him out here a little bit. Doesn't find it this turn, though.
I guess that the Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot may mean that he has the opportunity to get into that black mana for next turn a little bit more reliably. It would also leave 2 mana up for Subtle Strike, or indeed he could go with Ether Torch Renegade here.
Looks like we see the Renegade adding some energy, but not a lot of board presence to what Craig Wescoe has here.
The Ether Torch Renegade in red-black I've found to be a little bit less impressive because black not quite as efficient as at getting energy as, say, blue or indeed green, meaning that the second ability is not one that is, I think, too likely to be seen from Craig Wescoe here. The first ability to ping things, though, obviously a very, very solid thing to be able to do. And Martin Dang sat with 2 copies of Ether Trade Winds, I guess can feel comparatively safe against big attacks. He's got enough mana that he's going to be able to bounce whatever it is that Craig Wescoe has going on. And that feeling of safety, meaning that he's able to attack in just a little bit more, spends a couple of energy in order to be able to get stuck in with his crab, cruise his vehicle, and, well, this is a set of attacks that Craig Wescoe has to respect here. He's actually getting perilously close to death. This is an Aether Trade Winds before blockers. Janjit Sentry getting picked up alongside, well, I guess technically the servo gets picked up, but as soon as it leaves the battlefield, it effectively gets destroyed. It does not go to hand. The artwork actually fairly aptly showing what happens when you have the likes of a Thopter getting hit by Ether Trade Winds. It just kind of disintegrates. And that meaning that Craig Wescoe has to put some more real creatures, if you see what I mean, in front of the attackers coming from Martin Dang. Chooses to double block the crab. And there is a trick here from Wescoe to at least mean that that double block isn't going to hurt him quite as much.
This one and so let's see. And I'll -1 from this guy.
So Subtle Strike putting a +1/+1 counter on the Eager Construct and giving -1/-1 to Beaumat Bazaar Barge. Saves a little bit of life for Craig Wescoe, but there will be a second copy of Ether Trade Winds, sending that Eager Construct back to hand.
So now Martin Dang, the only one with creatures on the battlefield. Admittedly, one of those creatures intermittent thanks to it being a vehicle, though we know that he already has creatures in hand thanks to all of those Ether Trade Winds that he cast the previous turn. Reckless Fireweaver here, maybe a little bit too little too late. Still not got to the extra black mana for Essence Extraction. So Craig Wescoe in rebuild mode, but rebuilding with just 6 life and facing down against Martin Dang, who still is going to be able to rumble into the red zone here. Ambitious Etherborn entering the fray for Martin Dang, bringing a servo with it this time. I kind of like the fact that Fabricate does appear to be a decision. It's not automatic that you're going to make a big creature or a creature that brings a friend. This time round, the servo hanging back as the Etherborn jumps in a Bazaar Barge, and here are the attacks for Martin Dang and Wescoe in all sorts of rough stages.
At least one of these creatures must be blocked here for Craig Wescoe to survive. Gets in front of the Bomat Bazaar Barge, taking 4 from the High Tide Hermit.
And Janjeet Sentry here effectively able to remove a blocker available to Craig Wescoe. It can pay 2 energy and tap to tap or untap a creature. Right now, untapping not quite as important as just getting through those final points of damage. Craig Wescoe at just 2 life here. Caterpillar Bug, well, it triggers the Reckless Fireweaver. It potentially can gain a bit of lifelink, but I think that this may be too little too late.
Yeah, I think this is a losing battle here for Craig Wescoe, just, playing one creature a turn, chump blocking, not really getting him anywhere. I believe he did keep that Pillar Bug on top last turn with the Scry, which is understandable since it's a card that does something, but I don't know if it's the card that he needs to really get him out of this jam.
Now, Martin Dang beginning to run low on energy here. He did have to use 2 of it from his Janjeet Sentry in order to tap down one of Craig Wescoe's creatures, but conveniently the Crab can just crew a vehicle, and that meaning there's still big attacks coming from Martin Dang. Wescoe shows that he had the Essence Extraction the entire game, never found the second black mana, and that enough to close things out. Dang, while he did pick up a draw earlier on in this draft, has managed to navigate his way out pretty happily, 2-0-1. Certainly a fairly strong place to be, and that the end of our draft rounds here in the feature match area at Pro Tour Kaladesh, at least for today. We will get a chance to, of course, see more drafting tomorrow, and it's been a big one. There's been a lot of big names in our feature match area. Marcio Carvalho finally picked up a loss in draft after what seems like about a year of winning every single draft match that he's been able to put together. Paulo Vitor Damaderosa, of course, the player that's been able to put together the 3-0 in what was our featured pod, one of the tougher pods here at the Pro Tour. This one of the larger Pro Tours that we've ever seen in terms of individual players in an event.
Yeah, indeed, Tim. A lot of great names that we saw, a lot of great decks as well. I was really impressed by sort of the spectrum of everything that we saw. Hyper aggressive into Johnny combo type nonsense, as we called it, and then into Martin Dang's, more controlling blue-black deck. So really cool stuff to see out of this limited environment.
And if you're looking for cool stuff, you do not need to look much further, because after this round, well, it's constructed time here on Kaladesh, and Kaladesh is a world of invention. I cannot wait to see what's going to happen. Really hope that you're going to join us for that. But for now, we're going to head things back to the news desk.
Thank you so much to Tim Willoughby and Ian Duke there with the call on the final round of Limited. Rich Hagan alongside Brian David Marshall and Louis Scott Vargas here to kick off your lunchtime entertainment here. We've got about half an hour together. We're going to put a little bow on Limited. Then we're going to head out. If you like walking the plains, got something to tell you about in just a few minutes from now, and something to show you're going to really, really enjoy. Very exciting times. We're also going to take you behind the curtain of Inside R&D in Seattle, and then Luis will be here to preview the brand new standard. But guys, we start off with Limited. Luis, let's start with you. What was your sense of the morning we've just seen?
We saw a pretty wide range of decks. We saw Paulo Vitor Damaderosa 3-0 with really aggressive red-white deck. Meanwhile, we got to see Paul Rietzel, traditionally an aggro player, making like 20 energy with Panharmonicon and Whirlwind Virtuoso in his 3-color deck.
Yeah, and BDM, the interesting thing about the Rietzel deck is that when there is a set with lots of crazy cards like Kaladesh, you wonder whether those are cards that are specifically meant to be played at the kitchen table, and whether the price of paying them is that you're going to lose, but somewhere along the line you might pull out a game here and there. But it looks like these are cards that are weird, wacky, and good.
Yeah, very, very powerful. I had a very interesting conversation with Paul Rietzel on the floor, where he talked about the fact that he feels like he maybe relies on attacking with cheap creatures, almost like as a crutch. It's funny, if you follow Paul on social media and you see him talking about Magic, he's always talking about being a better Magic player and expanding his range of decks and of, doing better and putting more work into it. And, his takeaway seems to be for this event was that he didn't want to just be the guy who's, attacking with thriving grubs every turn. He had other things to do with his energy this turn, and they were just go semi-infinite.
Yeah.
With, what was it? Animation module, fabrication module, error of innovation.
And Whirlwind Virtuoso kind of completes the loop there.
Yeah. And it's just like, and if you haven't seen that, I know people have already clipped that segment of the tournament, and it's something to behold.
Yeah, and I want to mention that. Thank you very much to all of you at home who are already taking part in clips on twitch.tv/magic. If you see 30 seconds of awesome that you want to clip for us, use the hashtag PTTopPlays. That's PT for Pro Tour, top, T-O-P, plays, P-L-A-Y-S. PT Top Plays. Big shout out to Breeding Pool 91 and Marcel MTG. They've already been busy creating 30 seconds of awesome for us from the morning. But of course, we're going to head into standard in a little bit, and there'll be plenty of great moments for you to clip using the hashtag, again, PT Top Plays. Looking at the players who are 3-0, and we're going to look tomorrow in detail at the 3-0 deck list that came out of this morning. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 Hall of Famers with a perfect record. Paulo Vida Dama de Rosa, Yuya Watanabe and Owen Turtenwald, the 2 new Hall of Famers, are both 3-0. Rafael Levy of France, Jelger Wiegersma of the Netherlands, Kenji Samura of Japan, Eric Froelich is 3-0. Luis, is this a format that is so complex and so intricate in that kind of swirly way, which is obviously the intent of Kaladesh both artistically and creatively, like the Rietzl deck, that the best players are naturally going to rise to the top in Limited?
I think it's just, this is a format that really rewards preparation, and there's a lot of different decks. They're not even all complicated decks. We saw Andrzej Strasky playing a red-green beatdown, and his deck was very good. It wasn't exactly the hardest deck to put together, but he drafted his seat well and ended up with a great deck. So I think that you can say this format does reward preparation, but not all the decks are super complicated.
Paulo's deck not super complicated.
Nope.
May have been difficult to draft in his seat, just in terms of some of the choices he made. But once it's assembled, it's pretty straightforward, aggro deck.
Yeah.
Well, 50-some players have a perfect record, have yet to taste defeat, but that's going to whittle down and down. Remember, we play Swiss pairings, which means you're paired against someone on the same record as yourself. So 54 players, let's say, come in at 3-0, then that'll be 27 at 4-0, 14 at 5-0, 7, 4, 2. We should see 1, 2, or 3 perfect records by the end of the day. But to get there, we have 5 rounds of standard. So thanks very much to Luis and BDM. They'll be back with us as the day progresses, both here and, of course, in the booth. But now we want to turn our attention away from the tournament floor and, well, to someone's home, actually. Those of you who really love walking the plains, we were very sorry to see that go. Of course, they've now finished their incredibly successful run. We know how much you love it. We saw the wizard disappear into the dust with that vicious Mark Rosewater claiming the cowl at the end. But although Walking the Plains is done, the career in Magic of Nate Holt and Sean Kornhauser, the creators of Walking the Plains, is very much going from strength to strength. We focus here, of course we do, on decks, on deck choices, on card choices, on key plays, on what record you're on. When you say to someone, how are you doing? The answer is, oh yeah, I'm very well, thank you, and I'm feeling, been going to the gym lately. It's all, oh, I'm 4-1, or I'm 2-2. But we're going to change things up a little bit. The team behind Walking the Plains are going to introduce you to Enter the Battlefield. Now, if that name's familiar, they of course did the hugely successful documentary, which you can see right now on Netflix and YouTube. They're turning it into a series. And that means they're going out onto the road to tell the stories that we just don't have time when round follows round follows round. And instead, you're going to meet the people, the players, the friends, the family, the places, the local game stores that are so significant to these great stories of the great players in the game. So where did they start out as they head out to see a different side of the game? Well, they went to Roanoke, Virginia, and a somewhat familiar face, Brian Brown Doing. Here comes part 1 of Enter the Battlefield.
Marcio's fate right here.
This is
It's
it.
contained within this clue.
He's going to sacrifice the clue. What does he find? He finds a forest, and that's it. Brian Brown Doing is your world champion. He has defeated Marcio Carvalho 3-1, and he is your world champion. Take a look at Brian Brown Doing.
Thank you. Good match. Thank you.
Soak it in, Brian. This is your moment.
Roanoke, Virginia is an old-fashioned kind of town. Victorian houses, a charming main street, kids playing in the town square. Locals call Roanoke the Star City, and many of its businesses advertise the moniker. Beyond its down-home, cozy ambience, Roanoke also plays host to one of the biggest, baddest groups of Magic the Gathering players in the world. This story is about them, and how one of them made his way into the spotlight. They also like to barbecue because, well, who doesn't like to barbecue?
All right now we're just cooking some cheeseburgers and hot dogs. Decided to go easy today. Much a bigger fan of steak. Generally we buy gigantic tenderloin fillets.
So Roanoke is like average town USA. It's a really small city, but it's got a lot of really awesome people in it, and so that's what kind of makes it for me and why I really enjoy living here. Like, we're from the South, and we love our football and all that stuff, and then you've got people from, like, Brad's from North Dakota, and he's like, oh, hey, he says everything wrong. It's funny.
I thought I was Big Cheese before I came to Roanoke, and then I came to Roanoke. I took one ride with Brad to an IQ, and I realized that I was awful. I knew nothing about the game. I was like a third grader, and he was like college level. And then I met Cedric, and I realized I was great.
Many of Roanoke's Magic players moved there to work at Star City Games, one of Magic's biggest retailers and tournament organizers. Star City's pro players write articles, produce videos, travel constantly to events, and perhaps most importantly, they play in the Two-Headed Giant pre-release.
Right now we're looking at like an energy, maybe blue-green deck, and I just picked up a Thriving Turtle. I'm very excited because it's a turtle.
Brad, what's your assessment of the turtle?
It's fine. It's playable.
It's amazing, Brad. It's a turtle.
My social circle has basically just become those people entirely from what it once was. So those guys coming to Roanoke and like starting to work for Star City Games and things is basically like what propelled me into a career in Magic and took me from being just a big fish in a small pond to a reasonable sized fish in a reasonable sized pond.
So I've actually got to watch Brian go from like pretty good Magic player to like really good Magic player to like very, very good, great Magic player over the course of 3.5, 4 years. So that part's actually been kind of fun.
Obviously I knew who he was as a player before I knew him personally. After getting to know him, like, I don't know, he was like one of the best people I ever met, one of the most down-to-earth people I ever met, and he's really funny and says really stupid things, but it's fun to be around. So mostly stupid things, but it's funny, so we let him get away with it.
As he began to really focus on Magic, it was more of really a positive, because we could see he was working hard at something, he was enjoying it, he was more disciplined. He was even, thinking more about his health because he wanted to have the energy for the rigors of the tournaments, and so it was a positive thing.
When he was younger, he was homeschooled up through the 8th grade, but the homeschoolers they got a chess club together, homeschool chess club, and he did very well with that. The instructor, he said, Brian, if you can beat me at chess, I'll give you $10. Well, Brian didn't beat him the first time he played him, but he beat him the second time he played him. And I'm not sure that guy ever beat Brian again.
My parents did not like gaming because it was, in their, like, I was wasting my time with that kind of stuff when I could have been doing so much better things, and I had like, all this potential to do really well, and I was just kind of squandering it. And in a lot of ways, like, they're not wrong, I was doing that. But that created some tension between us. But over the years, like, we've really been able to work that out, and I just have a lot of respect for them and how they, like, handle themselves. They're basically like role models for how I want to live.
Roanoke sent 2 of its Magic players to the Magic World Championship in Seattle this year, a tremendous honor for a small town, considering the tournament consists of just 24 of the best players on Earth. While Brad Nelson is a decorated pro with prior experience at the World Championship, Brian Brown-Duin had never played in an event of this magnitude before.
Well, for me, when you go to a Pro Tour, it's just like stimuli overload. You just see 400 people, you see a couple familiar faces. But when you go here, you're just like, lost to that guy a bunch, lost to that guy a bunch, lost to that guy a bunch. I think I beat him once. And then I think about like the 3 or 4 guys that like everyone else is thinking about is like the players that, you know, got here from one tournament and they don't have a resume. And I'm just like, what are they thinking about? You know, like this is their first big tournament, you know, like they spend all year grinding. Are they just gonna fall on their face and embarrass themselves?
Yes. Yes, they are. Yeah, yeah. Like I really have no basis point for this tournament because I've just never played in anything like this. So I'm just gonna beat some of the best players in the world and kind of grind them under my heel, show them what the Grand Prix Master's all about.
It's about people, it's about places, it's about MTG communities. It is Enter the Battlefield, the series. If you want to see more, tune in tomorrow lunchtime. Nate and Sean and the Roanoke crew will be back as we explore what actually happened, no spoilers, at the World Championship. But they are going to be out and about around the world. Some big announcements coming for where they're heading next later in the weekend. But hope you enjoyed that. The Walking the Plains team entering the battlefield now and moving forward. So great news there. Okay, so talking of videos we prepared earlier, I had a chance to go to Wizards of the Coast in Seattle, Renton, Washington, to be precise, as they unveiled the inner secrets of Kaladesh. So we'll be back about 9 minutes from now after you see part 1 of Inside R&D. Hello everyone, I'm your host Rich Hagan, welcoming you to another episode of Inside R&D from Inside R&D, here at the home of Wizards of the Coast in Renton, Washington. Close your eyes. Imagine a pristine world of clean energy, endless invention, electric blue skies, sumptuous wonders, and limitless possibilities. Open your eyes. Welcome to Kaladesh.
One of the hardest things about my job is I do things that I'm really proud of, and then I have to sit on it for like 16 months, sometimes years. Like I do things I'm really happy with, and then I can't talk about them forever. And finally, I'm able to talk about them. So what I want to say is, Kaladesh! Awesome! It's awesome!
We've gone through Battle for Zendikar, we've gone through Shadows of Innistrad. Those are dark, dark places. Kaladesh is a much more happy place.
Basically, the idea was that we wanted to go someplace that was bright and sunny, something that wasn't that we had just been, you know, we had this drag-out war where Zendikar was being just destroyed, and then we go to Innistrad where everyone goes mad, it's really dark, and we're like, we want to do something fun and bright and optimistic and happy, and we said, you know what? Let's go to Chandra's world.
Magic is a game about fighting, and Kaladesh is an inherently optimistic world. So kind of where do those things meet? And it was a challenge. There are some colors that celebrate destruction more than other colors, but no matter what it was, we always wanted to emphasize the ingenuity that went into whatever the machine was that was doing the thing.
Normally, we have new worlds and we have revisits. When I revisit a world, we've been there and we have lots of art and we have all sorts of things to look at. But normally when I do a new world, it's like, who knows? I'm the first person, you know, my team's the first one usually to touch it, and that there's no idea. That we've talked about things, but because of Magic Origins, because we'd actually spent some time and energy figuring out what the world looked like, I actually started with some sort of ideas of what the world was, and that was infinitely helpful.
Steampunk was kind of a word that was a hook, something that we hung ideas on for a while, and realized that we had really kind of outgrown or gone beyond.
How do you take steampunk and make it upbeat? And the joke we had is take out the steam and take out the punk.
We didn't want any of the steampunk, gritty, grimy, polluted tropes. We wanted this to be brilliant, a brilliant world, something aspirational and optimistic and just somewhere you would want to go and love and live. And we were very inspired by the culture of India. And so those two things sort of melded and fused together to lay the backdrop for this world. Kaladesh has 5 races that we sort of created for it to populate this world. And some of them, like the elves, we've seen on Magic settings before. So one of the challenges when you're taking a race like the elves that people know from Zendikar, for example, we didn't want these to feel like Zendikar elves. We wanted these to feel like Kaladesh elves. So one of the ways that we did this for all of our races here was we designed them around what we called the ether cycle. So we said each race has a very specific spot in the cycle, and that's going to help define what that race does.
Elves traditionally, are these ancient beings that are known for their wisdom and their harmony with nature. And on some level, that's part of what elves are. So we had to figure out, how do we take elves and put them here? And we knew pretty early on we didn't want them to be at odds so much with society, that we wanted, again, keep in line with this optimism, this sense of optimism. So it really became that elves understood the interplay of ether and nature and even urban life. They understood how that all fits together kind of in a natural way. I think elves living in the cities of Kaladesh, in Girapur, it's not an abomination of nature to see, these cities rise up. Instead, they help shape these cities to be in harmony with these things. They see the world in a way that the other races just don't see it.
Blue has this ideal of perfection in general, but for the Vidalcan here, we kind of turn that on its head, where they rejoice in finding imperfections. They get very excited about finding an inefficiency in a system or a gear out of place, because that means they can fix it. That means they can make it better. And they know things can never actually be perfect. Nothing is ever perfect. But every time they find a little flaw, they get to come one step closer to perfecting it. And it's the process of perfecting and making things just a little bit better that they take joy in.
From innovate, you get to the build step. Obviously, once you have this idea for the machine or a device or whatever it is, you have to execute on that. And there is nobody better to do that than dwarves. One of the big dwarf tropes is the idea of craftsmanship. And this is exactly what the dwarves are all about. One of the quotes about them is, if there's no higher mark of quality than it being dwarf built.
They are airship captains. They trust in their invention so fully that it makes them seem like they're fearless, because they will get on the highest flying ships. They will go, take the rockets. They will ride around Oval Chase Arena in their race cars, because they've built them, and dwarf built is just, you cannot beat it. This is the best thing on Kaladesh.
Their legacy is an object they have built that will outlast them. They speak of these things that they built like they would speak of their own children.
The 4th race, as we're going around the ether cycle, are the gremlins, and they actually represent the liberate step of the ether cycle. So after the dwarves build it, sometimes you need a race that's going to allow you to get that ether back out into the environment so that you can eventually start the cycle all over again. So this is where we depend on our gremlins.
Who would be the mischievous ones here? It's we could go goblins. There are a lot of tradition of goblin tinkers and so on and things like that. And I think that we ultimately went with gremlins because we're pretty enamored with the kind of World War II concept of the gremlins, of the ones, eating the airplanes and causing all these mayhem to equipment. And it just felt right here. We have airships here, and we wanted to play in that space of just carving out something new for Kaladesh.
Kaladesh is probably our most optimistic setting ever. We knew going in that we wanted bright colors, blue skies, that we wanted this technology that they have to be non-polluting. This is a clean industrial revolution. It is a clean place. But that presented some problems for things that we do in every Magic set. One of those is the color black. So as we were tackling that, we're like, vampires? Vampires don't really feel right here. Undead like zombies, that doesn't seem to fit. We decided pretty early on we're going to need to make a new black-aligned race.
The Aetherborn are a really strange race that come into existence as a byproduct of the refinement of ether. When ether is gathered in and whatever impurities are removed from it, or whatever instability is extracted in the refinement process, the Aetherborn are what's left. They take on intelligence and personality and life, and live a very short, fleeting life until ultimately ether released from its confines and artifacts recombines with them and goes back to being the free ether in the ether sphere. It's very strange.
The creation of the ether cycle, and in particular the Etherborn, was really exciting for me. This was the first set that I was involved in from the very beginning, from world building, and it actually, one of the things that I came up with was the race of Etherborn and the way that energy could be refined on this world. So part of my personal history is that I'm a scientist before I came here, and so a lot of that came into play. It was so much fun to think about what would the actual chemical reaction be. I have so many different equations scribbled in my notebooks of like what would actually be happening. What is ether? What are the what are the free radicals doing here? What is the Etherborn actually? What is the process of decay? The rate of decay? All of that kind of stuff.
I think it's fair to say that in Shadows of Innistrad, where all the most of the monsters that people confronted, or that confronted people, were essentially extensions of humanity. Whereas on Kaladesh, I think you do get the opposite. You do get this sense of humanity here is confronted with limitless possibilities, that you could build your way to anything. And that's something that is expressed in the gameplay, that is something that is definitely in the world building, that anything is buildable.